They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood turns cold? When the person sleeping under your roof is the one planning your downfall? This is the story of Marcus, the brother who didn't just leave his family, he destroyed them. The Harrington house looked like something out of a magazine. It stood at the end of Maple Drive with its bright white fence, perfectly cut grass, and flowers blooming in every corner. Neighbors loved driving past it. They'd point and say, "That's the house everyone wants." Inside, the walls were covered with family photos, birthdays, graduations, beach vacations, all showing big smiles and happy faces. Everything looked perfect. But photos only show one moment. They don't show what happens when the camera is put away. They don't show the quiet meals where no one talks. They don't show the hurt hiding behind those smiles. The Harringtons looked like the perfect family from the outside. But if you lived inside that house, you'd feel something else. Something cold. Something wrong. Something that had been growing in the shadows for years, just waiting for the right moment to explode. What happens when a perfect family is just pretending? Marcus Harrington was the older brother, but you'd never know it by looking at him. At 32 years old, he seemed smaller than he actually was, always standing in the corner, hands in his pockets, trying not to be noticed. He worked as an accountant, a boring job that no one ever asked him about. At family dinners, he'd sit quietly, listening to everyone else talk, barely saying a word. His younger brother Daniel was completely different. Daniel was tall, handsome, and confident. He had the kind of smile that made people trust him immediately. He ran the family business, now a shipping company their dad had started years ago with just one truck. Everyone loved Daniel. Customers loved him. Employees loved him. Even random people at the store seemed to light up when Daniel walked by. Their parents always said they loved both sons the same. But Marcus knew the truth. Love isn't always equal. He'd been keeping track since he was a kid every time they forgot his birthday. Every time they chose Daniel's game over his school play. Every family picture where Daniel stood in the middle and Marcus was pushed to the side. Marcus never complained. He smiled, he helped. He showed up. But deep inside, behind those quiet eyes, one question kept burning. Why am I never enough? And that question was slowly turning into something dangerous. The difference between the two brothers was clear at every family gathering. Daniel would walk in and the whole room would change. People would laugh louder, talk faster, leaning closer. Their mother would hug him tight and say, "There's my boy." Their father, when he was alive, would clap Daniel on the back with pride. Marcus would arrive a few minutes later and get a quick nod. "Oh, Marcus is here too." Someone might say, almost like they forgot he was coming. He'd sit down, eat his food, and watch. Always watching. He saw how his mother's eyes followed Daniel around the room. He noticed how his father used to brag about Daniel's business deals, but never mentioned Marcus's promotions at work. He heard the way people asked Daniel about his life, but only gave Marcus polite, empty questions like, "How's work?" with no real interest in the answer. Over the years, Marcus had become a ghost in his own family. Present but not seen. There but not noticed. And ghosts, when ignored for too long, start to haunt. Marcus had learned to hide his feelings so well that even he almost believed he was fine. Almost. But late at night, alone in his apartment, the mask would slip. He'd sit in the dark and replay every forgotten moment. Every time he felt invisible. And slowly, quietly, a plan began forming in his mind. Not a plan for violence, no, something much worse. What happens when the quiet brother finally stops being quiet? It didn't start with one big moment. It started with 1,000 small cuts. When Marcus was 7 years old, his birthday fell on a Tuesday. He woke up excited, ran downstairs expecting balloons and maybe pancakes with candles. Instead, he found his mother rushing around the kitchen, packing lunches. Morning, sweetie, she said without looking up. Don't forget, Daniel has soccer practice after school. We'll do your birthday this weekend, okay? That weekend never came. They forgot. When Marcus finally reminded them 3 days later, his mother gasped and covered her mouth. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. She bought him a cake from the grocery store and they sang happy birthday in the kitchen, just the three of them. Daniel wasn't even there, he was at a friend's house. Marcus blew out the candles and made a wish. But even at 7 years old, he knew wishes didn't come true for kids like him. Then there was his middle school graduation. Marcus had worked hard to be on the honor roll. He was excited to walk across that stage and see his parents clapping in the audience. But when the ceremony started, his parents' seats were empty. He kept looking back, hoping they were just running late. They showed up 40 minutes later, right as the ceremony was ending. Sorry, honey, his father said, barely looking at him. Daniel's championship game ran long. But we're here now. Marcus just nodded and smiled. That's what he always did. How many times can a child be forgotten before they stop expecting to be remembered? By the time Marcus was 15, he'd learned an important lesson. Don't expect anything, and you won't be disappointed. He stopped telling his parents about his achievements. When he made honor roll again, he didn't mention it. When he got accepted into the advanced math program, he kept it to himself. When he won a writing contest at school, he threw the certificate in his drawer and never spoke about it. Meanwhile, Daniel's accomplishments were celebrated like national holidays. A goal scored in soccer? The whole family went out to dinner. A B+ on a hard test? Their dad bought him a new video game. Daniel wasn't doing it on purpose, he was just a kid too. But he was the sun and Marcus was learning to live in the shade. At family dinners, Marcus would sit quietly and listen to everyone talk about Daniel's day, Daniel's friends, Daniel's future. Sometimes his mother would remember he was there and ask, "How was your day, Marcus?" He'd say, "Fine," and that would be the end of it. No follow-up questions. No real interest. Just a polite check-in to make sure he wasn't dead. Marcus started eating faster so he could leave the table sooner. He'd go to his room, close the door, and lose himself in books or video games worlds where he could be important, where his choices mattered. His parents thought he was just a quiet, independent kid. They had no idea they were creating a bomb. When does loneliness turn into something darker? The moment that broke something inside Marcus happened when he was 17. It was late one night, and he'd come downstairs to get water. He heard his parents talking in the living room and stopped in the hallway to listen. His mother sounded worried. "I don't know what Daniel's going to do after high school," she said. "His grades aren't great. What if he doesn't get into a good college?" His father sighed. "We'll figure it out. We always do. Daniel's got potential, he just needs the right push." There was a pause. Then his mother said, "What about Marcus?" His father's response came quickly, casually, like he was talking about the weather. "Marcus will be fine. He always is. That kid could land on his feet anywhere. It's Daniel I worry about." Marcus stood frozen in that hallway, the glass of water shaking in his hand. He felt something crack inside his chest, not his heart, but something deeper. His father wasn't proud of him. His father didn't see his independence as strength. He saw it as proof that Marcus didn't need them, that Marcus didn't deserve their worry, their attention, their love. Marcus went back to his room that night and didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, replaying those words over and over. Marcus will be fine. Fine, not loved, not cherished, just ... fine. And in that moment, a dark seed was planted. A seed that would take years to grow, but would eventually consume everything. Can you pinpoint the exact moment a person breaks, or does it happen so slowly you don't notice until it's too late? The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus was at work, reviewing spreadsheets in his small office, when his phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Dad's gone," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Heart attack. He didn't make it." Marcus felt his stomach drop, but not from sadness, from something more complicated. Grief mixed with anger, mixed with relief, mixed with guilt for feeling relieved. He told his boss he had a family emergency and drove to his childhood home in silence. When he arrived, the house was full of people, neighbors, family friends, distant relatives he barely recognized. Everyone was hugging Daniel, telling him how sorry they were, how strong he needed to be now. Marcus walked through the crowd like a ghost. A few people patted his shoulder. One aunt said, "You holding up okay?" without waiting for an answer. He found his mother in the kitchen, surrounded by casserole dishes people had dropped off. She looked small and broken. When she saw Marcus, she reached for him, and he held her while she cried into his shoulder. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. Marcus wanted to say, "You'll do what you always do, focus on Daniel and forget I exist." But instead he said, "We'll get through this. I'm here." The funeral was 3 days later. Marcus helped organize everything, the flowers, the program, the reception. No one asked him to. He just did it. Because that's what Marcus did. He showed up. He handled things. He made sure everyone else was okay. But who was making sure Marcus was okay? 2 weeks after the funeral, the lawyer called them in to read the will. Marcus sat in the leather chair across from the attorney's desk, his mother on one side, Daniel on the other. He wasn't expecting much. Maybe a few $1,000s, some personal items. He already made peace with that. The lawyer opened the folder and began reading. The house would go to their mother as expected. Some savings would be split between her and the sons. Then came the business. Marcus felt his heart beat faster. The business their father had spent 40 years building. The business that was now worth millions. The lawyer cleared his throat. The entirety of Harrington Logistics, including all assets, accounts, and operational control, is to be transferred to Daniel Marcus Harrington. Daniel, not both of them. Just Daniel. Marcus felt the room tilt. He gripped the armrest to steady himself. The lawyer continued. To Marcus James Harrington, I leave the sum of $50,000 in my personal book collection. $50,000. And some old books. Marcus's mother reached over and squeezed his hand, like that was supposed to make it okay. Daniel looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The lawyer pulled out an envelope. Your father also left a personal note for each of you. He handed Daniel a thick letter. Then he gave Marcus a single folded piece of paper. Marcus opened it with shaking hands. The note was short. Marcus, I know this might seem unfair, but I trust you'll understand. Daniel needs guidance and structure. The business will give him that. You've always been independent and capable. I know you'll be fine on your own. You always have been. I'm proud of the man you've become. Love, Dad. Marcus read it 3 times. Each time the words felt like knives. You'll be fine. You always have been. Not I love you more than I can say. Not you're just as important. Just, you'll be fine. How do you grieve a father who never truly saw you? The meeting ended and they walked out into the parking lot. Daniel tried to talk to him. Marcus, listen, I didn't know he was going to... Congratulations, Marcus said, cutting him off. His voice was calm. Too calm. He extended his hand and Daniel shook it, confused. You deserve it, Marcus added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're going to do great things with the company. Daniel looked relieved. Thanks, man. And hey, if you ever need anything, money, a job, whatever, you just let me know, okay? We're still brothers. Marcus nodded. Of course. We're still brothers. But as Marcus walked to his car, something inside him had already died. And something else had been born. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at that note from his father. "You'll be fine on your own." His hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Fine. He'd spent his entire life being fine. Being the one who didn't need help. The one who didn't complain. The one who disappeared into the background so Daniel could shine. And this was his reward. $50,000 and a pat on the head. Marcus started the car and drove home. But he wasn't the same person who'd walked into that lawyer's office. That Marcus, the quiet, patient, forgiving Marcus, was gone. What replaced him was something colder. Something calculating. Something that had finally stopped caring about being good. Because if 30 years of being good got you nothing, then maybe it was time to try something else. When does pain turn into power? When does a victim become something far more dangerous? Marcus didn't storm off or make threats. He didn't burn bridges or curse his family's name. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He disappeared into patience. For 3 months, he lived his normal life. He went to work, paid his bills, and showed up to family dinners with the same quiet smile he'd always worn. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, Marcus was transforming. Every night, he'd come home to his small apartment, pour himself a drink, and sit at his kitchen table with a notebook. He started writing everything down, every detail about Daniel's business, every connection his family had, every weakness he could find. He studied them like a scientist studies bacteria under a microscope, cold, analytical, detached. He researched company structures, legal loopholes, financial systems. He learned about offshore accounts, shell companies, and how money could disappear if he knew the right paths to take. Marcus had always been smart on a roll, advanced classes, a degree in accounting. But his family never celebrated that intelligence. Now, he was going to use it as a weapon. He realized something important during those late-night planning sessions. The best revenge isn't quick. It's slow. It's invisible. It's watching someone lose everything piece by piece and never knowing who's behind it. Marcus wanted Daniel to feel what he'd felt his entire life: powerless, confused, and utterly alone. And the beautiful part? Daniel trusted him completely. How do you fight an enemy who's been invisible his whole life? 6 months after the will reading, Marcus made his first move. Daniel had called him, stressed and overwhelmed. "Man, running this business is harder than I thought," Daniel admitted over the phone. "Dad made it look easy. I'm drowning in paperwork and numbers. I don't know what half of this stuff even means." Marcus let a pause hang in the air, then said slowly, like he was just thinking of it, "I could help. I work with numbers every day. I could look over the books for you, make sure everything's organized." Daniel sounded relieved instantly. "Really? Dude, that would be amazing. I'll pay you, obviously." "Don't worry about payment," Marcus interrupted. "We're family. That's what brothers do, right?" Daniel laughed. "You're a lifesaver, Marcus. Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you." Marcus smiled into the phone. "Neither do I." And just like that, Marcus had full access. Within 2 weeks, he had passwords to every account, copies of every contract, access to company emails, and financial records. Daniel handed it all over without a second thought. Why wouldn't he? Marcus was the responsible one, the trustworthy one, the one who'd always been there, quietly fixing things in the background. Daniel had no idea he'd just given the keys to his kingdom to the one person who wanted to watch it burn. Marcus started slowly. He reviewed the books like he promised, but he also began making small changes. A vendor payment here, an expense report there. Nothing obvious. Just tiny cracks in the foundation. He created fake consulting fees, invented business trips that never happened, and rerouted small amounts of money into accounts Daniel didn't even know existed. The genius was that Marcus made it look like Daniel's mistakes. Every month, Marcus would point out errors to Daniel, errors that Marcus himself had created. Hey, looks like this payment was processed twice. You gotta be more careful, man. Daniel would apologize, embarrassed, and promise to pay more attention. He had no idea Marcus was training him to doubt himself. What's more dangerous enemy you can see, or one disguised as your savior? But Marcus knew destroying the business alone wasn't enough. He wanted to dismantle everything: reputation, relationships, trust. So he started planting seeds with Daniel's business partners. At networking events, Marcus would casually mention concerns. "I'm a little worried about Daniel," he'd say with a concerned brother's frown. "He's been making some unusual decisions lately. I hope he's not in over his head." The partners would nod, file that information away. Then, a week later, Daniel would make a normal business decision, but now they'd view it through Marcus's lens of doubt. Is Daniel struggling? Is the company in trouble? Marcus also began an anonymous email campaign. Using untraceable accounts, he'd send tips to competitors, details about Daniel's bids, his pricing strategies, his client list. Suddenly, the company was losing contracts they should have won. Clients were jumping to competitors who somehow knew exactly how to undercut them. Daniel couldn't understand what was happening. "It's like they know our every move," Daniel said one night over beers, frustrated and exhausted. Marcus shook his head sympathetically. "Maybe you've got a leak somewhere. An employee selling information? Maybe," Daniel muttered, rubbing his face. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Marcus put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You can trust me. I've got your back, always." Daniel looked at him with genuine gratitude. "I know, man. You're the only one who does." Marcus smiled, and deep inside, in a place where empathy used to live, he felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no hesitation. Only cold, calculated satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. Daniel was starting to unravel, and he was running straight into the arms of the person destroying him. Can you feel sympathy for someone who never felt sympathy for you? 1 year into Marcus's plan, the damage was beginning to show, but only if you knew where to look. Daniel's company was still standing, still making money, but the foundation was crumbling like old concrete. Marcus had been careful, surgical even, in how he extracted funds. It started with small amounts: $3,000 here, $5,000 there, disguised as legitimate business expenses that no one would question. A consulting fee for a company that didn't exist. Equipment upgrades that were never purchased. Emergency repairs for problems that were never real. Marcus had created an entire phantom economy within Daniel's business. A shadow world where money flowed in one direction, into Marcus's secret accounts. He'd set up shell companies with names that sounded official Summit Advisory Group, Apex Solutions LLC, Redline Capital Management. On paper, they looked legitimate. In reality, they were just digital mailboxes that Marcus controlled. Every month, Daniel would sign off on payments to these companies without realizing he was funding his own destruction. The beautiful irony was that Daniel actually thanked Marcus for catching discrepancies. "Man, I don't know how you spot this stuff," Daniel said one afternoon, looking at a spreadsheet Marcus had prepared. "You saved us like $15,000 last quarter." Marcus had actually stolen $30,000 that same quarter, but he'd found 15 in fake overcharges to make himself look like a hero. Daniel saw his brother as a guardian angel. He had no idea he was staring at the devil. How much can you steal from someone before they notice? Marcus was determined to find out, but Marcus wasn't satisfied with just taking money. Money was easy. Money could be replaced. What Marcus wanted was something deeper. He wanted to poison Daniel's reputation, to make people question everything about him. So Marcus became a whisperer of doubts, planting seeds of suspicion wherever Daniel's name came up. At a Chamber of Commerce meeting, Marcus stood next to one of Daniel's longtime business partners, a man named Robert Chen who'd worked with their father for 20 years. "How's Daniel holding up?" Robert asked casually. Marcus paused like he was choosing his words carefully, then sighed. Honestly, Robert, I'm worried. He's been acting strange lately, paranoid, making rash decisions. Last week he snapped at an employee for no reason. None of that was true, but Robert's expression shifted immediately to concern. Really? That doesn't sound like him. I know, Marcus said quietly. Between you and me, I think the pressure's getting to him. He's not sleeping. I caught him having an argument with someone on the phone at midnight. I don't know what's going on, but he let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but heavy with implication. 2 weeks later, Robert called a meeting with Daniel to check in on the company's direction. Daniel, confused by the sudden scrutiny, became defensive. His defensiveness made Robert more suspicious. The cycle fed itself perfectly. Marcus did this, systematically dripping poison into every relationship Daniel had. A comment to a supplier. Make sure Daniel approves that personally. He's been forgetting things lately. A casual mention to a client. Daniel's going through some personal stuff. If you need anything urgent, maybe loop me in too, just to be safe. Each statement was small, almost forgettable. But together they created a narrative Daniel was losing control. And the more people believed it, the more they treated Daniel differently, which made Daniel act differently, which confirmed their suspicions. How do you defend yourself against accusations that were never directly made? Then Marcus escalated. He started leaking actual company secrets, not to law enforcement or anyone who could trace it back, but to competitors who would use the information to hurt Daniel's business. Marcus had access to everything. Upcoming bids, client contracts, expansion plans, pricing strategies. He'd anonymously email this information to rival companies, always from burner email accounts created in coffee shops or libraries, never from anywhere that could be traced. The first major loss came when Daniel bid on a huge contract with a regional retail chain, deal that could have brought in over $2 million in revenue. Daniel spent weeks preparing the proposal, pricing it competitively, but with enough profit margin to make it worthwhile. The day before submission, Marcus sent an anonymous email to Daniel's biggest competitor with all the details: Daniel's price point, his timeline, his proposed team structure. The competitor undercut Daniel by exactly 5% and won the contract. Daniel was devastated. I don't understand, he said, pacing Marcus's living room later that week. Our proposal was perfect. How did they know exactly how to beat us? Marcus sat on the couch, shaking his head. Maybe it's just bad luck. Or maybe... He stopped, acting like he didn't want to say it. What? Daniel pressed. Maybe someone inside your company is talking. Corporate espionage happens, Daniel. Especially to successful companies. Daniel's face went pale. You think someone I trust is selling me out? I don't know, Marcus said carefully. But you might want to start looking closer at your employees. Someone knows too much. Over the next month, Daniel became paranoid. He started questioning his staff, reviewing their emails, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. 3 good employees quit, tired of being treated like criminals. The company's morale collapsed. And through it all, Marcus sat back and watched, offering comfort and advice while steadily tightening the noose around his brother's neck. The first strike had landed perfectly. Daniel was bleeding, confused, and looking for enemies everywhere except in the one place he should have looked, right beside him. When you're drowning, the last person you suspect is the one holding your head underwater. 18 months into Marcus's silent war, Daniel's life was falling apart in slow motion. The business that had once thrived under their father was now struggling to stay afloat. Clients were leaving, citing better offers from competitors who somehow always knew exactly what to promise. Employees were quitting because Daniel had become suspicious and controlling, questioning everyone's loyalty. The company's bank accounts were mysteriously draining faster than revenue could fill them. Daniel couldn't sleep anymore. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, and go over the numbers again and again, trying to find where he'd gone wrong. His wife, Amanda, would find him at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, his eyes red and exhausted. "You need to stop," she'd say gently. "You're killing yourself." But Daniel couldn't stop. He felt like he was trying to hold water in his hands and watching it slip through his fingers no matter how tight he squeezed. He started working 16-hour days, canceling family plans, missing his daughter's school events. He snapped at people over small things. His hands shook when he signed documents. Friends stopped calling because every conversation became about the business, about his stress, about his paranoia that someone was sabotaging him. And through it all, Marcus was there, the concerned older brother, always ready with advice, always offering to help. "Maybe you should take a break," Marcus suggested during one of their weekly meetings. "Go on vacation. Clear your head. I can watch things here." Daniel laughed bitterly. "I can't afford a vacation. We're bleeding money, Marcus. I don't understand it. Everything should be working, but it's all falling apart." Marcus put a sympathetic hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You're doing your best. Sometimes businesses go through rough patches. Dad had them too." What Daniel didn't know was that Marcus had just transferred another $40,000 that morning, disguised as a tax payment to a fake government account Marcus had created. How long can someone fight an invisible enemy before they break? The stress destroyed Daniel's marriage slowly, like rust eating through metal. Amanda had been patient at first, understanding that running the business was hard. But as months passed and Daniel became a stranger distant, angry, obsessed, her patience wore thin. They stopped having dinner together. Stopped talking about anything except logistics and schedules. Their daughter, Sophie, started asking why Daddy was always mad. One night, after Daniel missed Sophie's birthday party because of an emergency meeting, Amanda confronted him. "This has to stop, Daniel. You're never here. When you are here, you're not really here. Sophie asked me yesterday if you still love us." Daniel exploded. "Of course I love you. I'm doing this for you. Do you think I want to work like this? The business is falling apart, and I don't know why. I'm trying to save our future." "What future?" Amanda shot back, tears streaming down her face. "You're so focused on saving the business that you're destroying our family." They didn't speak for 3 days after that fight. And that's when Marcus made his move. He started calling Amanda casually at first. "Hey, I just wanted to check on you. Daniel told me you guys had a rough night." Amanda, starved for someone to talk to, opened up. Marcus listened. He was patient, kind, understanding everything Daniel wasn't anymore. "You deserve better than this," Marcus said during one of their coffee meets. "Daniel's changed. This isn't the man you married." "I keep hoping he'll come back," Amanda said quietly. "The old Daniel, the one who laughed and paid attention and actually saw me." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Maybe the old Daniel is gone. Maybe this is who he is now, someone who cares more about money than people. Those words planted themselves deep in Amanda's mind. Over the next few weeks, as Daniel continued to spiral, Amanda kept hearing Marcus's voice. Maybe this is who he is now. Can you save a marriage when someone else is whispering that it's already dead? The final crack in the family came when their mother, Helen, got sick. It started with headaches and dizziness, which she brushed off as stress. But when she collapsed at the grocery store, the doctors found her blood pressure was dangerously high. "It's stress-induced," the doctor told them in the hospital room. "She's carrying too much worry. She needs rest, peace, and family support." Daniel stood at the foot of her bed, looking guilty and exhausted. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll do better. I'll visit more," but Helen knew he wouldn't. He couldn't. The business was consuming him. Marcus, on the other hand, was there every other day. He'd bring Helen flowers, sit with her, tell her stories. He became her rock. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Helen told Marcus one afternoon, squeezing his hand. "You're such a good son." Marcus smiled warmly. "I'm just doing what family does, Mom." What Helen didn't know was that her good son was the reason her other son was falling apart, that the stress killing her was Marcus's design, that every kind word he spoke was wrapped around a blade. Helen watched Daniel self-destruct from her hospital bed, and it broke her heart. She tried to talk to him to understand what was happening, but Daniel was too far gone. He'd show up to the hospital distracted, checking his phone constantly, leaving after 20 minutes because of some new crisis. "I'm losing him," Helen told Marcus one evening, tears in her eyes. "I'm losing my son and I don't know how to get him back." Marcus held her while she cried, making comforting sounds, stroking her hair. And inside, in the place where his conscience used to be, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what he wanted, to watch them suffer the way he'd suffered. To make them feel abandoned, forgotten, helpless. The Harrington family was crumbling, and Marcus was the architect of their destruction, hiding in plain sight as their savior. How does it feel to destroy the people who never loved you, even as they cling to you for survival? Amanda filed for divorce on a cold November morning, exactly 2 years after Marcus's plan had begun. Daniel came home from another late night at the office to find her sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her and a lawyer's business card placed carefully on top. Her eyes were red but determined. "I can't do this anymore," she said simply. Daniel felt his world tilt. "Amanda, please." "I know things have been hard, but I'm fixing it. The business is going to turn around. I just need more time." "It's not about the business, Daniel," she interrupted, her voice shaking. "It's about you. You've become someone I don't recognize. You're angry all the time. You ignore Sophie. You ignore me. I feel like I'm living with a ghost." Daniel tried to argue, tried to promise he'd change, but Amanda had heard it all before. She'd made her decision. "I've already talked to a lawyer," she said. "I'm asking for full custody of Sophie. You're in no condition to take care of her right now." Those words hit Daniel like a punch to the stomach. "You're taking my daughter?" "I'm protecting our daughter," Amanda corrected. From a father who's too obsessed with saving a dying business to notice she exists. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, emotional neglect, and financial irresponsibility. Amanda's lawyer had built a case showing Daniel's erratic behavior, his declining mental state, his inability to maintain stability. And the person who'd helped Amanda's lawyer gather that evidence, the person who'd introduced Amanda to the lawyer in the first place, Marcus. He'd done it subtly, of course. A casual mention over coffee. "My friend Corinne is a divorce attorney. She's really good at protecting people in situations like yours." Amanda had called Corinne the next day. Marcus had already briefed Corinne on everything. Daniel's paranoia, his business troubles, his absence from family life. The case practically built itself. When Daniel called Marcus, sobbing, saying Amanda was leaving and taking Sophie, Marcus played his role perfectly. "Oh my God, Daniel. I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over?" "No," Daniel said, his voice broken. I don't understand how everything fell apart so fast." "Sometimes life just hits you all at once," Marcus said softly. "But you'll get through this? You're strong." Daniel wasn't strong anymore. He was shattered. And Marcus knew it. How do you console someone when you're the reason they're crying? Marcus didn't stop with just facilitating the divorce. He inserted himself directly into Amanda's life, positioning himself as her emotional support. He texted her regularly. "How are you holding up? Do you need anything?" He'd offered to babysit Sophie when Amanda needed a break. He'd listened to her vent about Daniel, nodding sympathetically. occasionally adding fuel to the fire with carefully chosen words. "I hate seeing you go through this," Marcus told her one evening as they sat in her living room. Sophie was asleep upstairs, and Amanda was drinking wine, looking exhausted and sad. "Daniel wasn't always like this. I don't know what happened to him." "The business changed him," Marcus said, which was technically true. The business had changed Daniel, specifically because Marcus had been destroying it from the inside. "Sometimes people can't handle pressure. They break." Amanda looked at him with tired eyes. "You're nothing like him, you know that? You're calm, present, reliable. Sometimes I wonder—" She stopped herself, but Marcus knew what she was thinking. He'd planted those thoughts carefully over months of conversations. He'd made himself the anti-Daniel everything her husband wasn't. Marcus could have taken it further. He could have pursued Amanda romantically, completed the ultimate betrayal. But he didn't. That wasn't the point. The point wasn't to steal Daniel's wife, it was to make Daniel watch the person you loved slip away while trusting the man who'd orchestrated it. Marcus wanted Daniel to feel grateful to him, even as he lost everything. That was true power. During the divorce proceedings, Marcus even offered to help Daniel financially. "I've got some savings," Marcus said. "If you need money for the lawyer, I can lend it to you." Daniel, desperate and touched, accepted. He had no idea the money he was borrowing had been stolen from his own company. Marcus was literally making Daniel pay for his own destruction. What's crueler, taking everything from someone quickly, or making them thank you while you do it slowly? The divorce was finalized in March. Daniel lost the house. He couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. He lost primary custody of Sophie. The judge cited his unstable work schedule and living situation. He was granted supervised visitation every other weekend. Amanda got the stability, the security, the life. Daniel got a one-bedroom apartment and mandatory therapy sessions. On the day Daniel moved out of his house, Marcus showed up with a truck to help. They loaded boxes in silence, Daniel moving like a zombie, barely speaking. When they finished, they sat on the empty living room floor, surrounded by echoes. "I've lost everything," Daniel said, staring at the walls. "My wife, my daughter, my house. The business is barely surviving. I feel like I'm cursed." Marcus sat next to him and put an arm around his shoulders. "You're not cursed. You're just going through the hardest time of your life. But you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here." Daniel leaned into his brother and cried. Actually cried on Marcus's shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Daniel whispered. "You're the only person who hasn't given up on me." Marcus held him, staring at the empty room, feeling the weight of his brother's broken body against his own. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, a tiny flicker of doubt. A small voice asking, "Is this enough? Has he suffered enough?" But then he remembered. He remembered being 7 years old and forgotten. He remembered being 17 and hearing his father say he'd be fine. He remembered the will reading, the inheritance, the lifetime of being invisible. And that tiny flicker of doubt was crushed under the weight of decades of pain. No, it wasn't enough. Not yet. Daniel had lost his wife, his daughter, his home. But he still had the business. He still had his reputation. He still had hope. And Marcus was going to take those things too. When does revenge satisfy you? And when does it become the only thing keeping you alive? Marcus had been perfect for 2.5 years. Not a single mistake. Every move calculated, every word measured, every action designed to stay invisible while destroying everything around him. But perfection is exhausting, and even the most careful person eventually slips. It happened on a Friday night at a bar downtown. Marcus had met up with an old college friend named Eric, someone outside the family circle, someone he hadn't seen in years. They were a few drinks in, reminiscing about old times, when Eric asked casually, So, how is your family doing? I remember you had a younger brother, right? Marcus, loosened by whiskey and tired from years of wearing a mask, smiled a little too widely. Daniel? Oh, he's struggling. Something in Marcus's tone made Eric look up. Struggling how? Marcus took another sip, his eyes distant. Let's just say karma finally caught up with him. He's losing everything, his wife, his business, his mind. It's actually kind of beautiful to watch. Eric laughed uncomfortably. That's harsh, man. I thought you guys were close. We are, Marcus said, and there was something cold in his voice now. I'm helping him through it. Being the good brother. He paused, swirling his drink. But between you and me, it's exactly what he deserves. What they all deserve. Eric's smile faded. What do you mean? Marcus realized a second too late that he'd said too much. He tried to backtrack, laugh it off as dark humor, but the words were already out there, hanging in the air like smoke. Nothing, man. I'm just drunk and bitter. Forget it. They changed the subject, but Eric didn't forget. The comment bothered him. Over the next few days, he thought about Marcus's tone, that cold smile, the phrase exactly what he deserves. It felt wrong. A week later, Eric ran into someone at a networking event, a mutual acquaintance who knew the Harrington family. Eric mentioned this strange conversation, not thinking much of it. Marcus said something weird about his brother Daniel losing everything. It almost sounded like he was happy about it. The acquaintance frowned. That's odd. I thought Marcus was helping Daniel keep the business together. Word travels in small communities. That comment made its way to another person, then another, until it reached the ears of James Sullivan, a longtime family friend who'd known the Harringtons for 30 years. James had watched Daniel's decline with concern, and now this strange piece of information made something click in his mind. Why would Marcus sound happy about his brother's suffering? James Sullivan wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He was a retired accountant, methodical and thorough, someone who believed in evidence over suspicion. But he cared deeply about the Harrington family, especially after watching Helen deteriorate in the hospital. So he started paying attention. He noticed things he'd overlooked before, like how Marcus was always around during Daniel's worst moments, always offering help, but somehow Daniel's situation never improved. It only got worse. He noticed how Marcus had become Helen's primary caregiver, isolating her from Daniel, subtly reinforcing the narrative that Daniel was too unstable to be relied upon. He noticed how Marcus had inserted himself into Amanda's life, how he'd been there during the divorce, supporting her in ways that seemed helpful but also strategic. James began asking quiet questions. He spoke to Daniel's business partners, employees, suppliers. He asked about Marcus's involvement in the company. Oh, Marcus is great, one employee said. He's basically been running the financial side for the last 2 years. Daniel trusts him completely. That sentence stuck with James. Marcus has been running the finances. And Daniel's financial problems started around the same time. It could be coincidence. Or it could be something else. James made a decision. He used his old connections in the accounting world to hire a forensic accountant, someone who specialized in finding financial fraud. You didn't tell Daniel. He didn't tell anyone. He just provided the accountant with access to publicly available business records and said, "Tell me if anything looks wrong." It took 3 weeks. When the forensic accountant called him back, James was sitting in his home office, and the news made his blood run cold. Mr. Sullivan, there are serious irregularities in Harrington Logistics' accounts. Multiple transfers to shell companies, fake vendors, expense manipulation. Someone with internal access has been systematically draining the business for years. We're talking about possibly over $1 million. James felt sick. Can you trace where the money went? Some of it, yes. It's been laundered through several layers, but there are patterns. I need to dig deeper, but this is definitely fraud. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. James thanked him and sat in silence for a long time. His mind didn't want to accept what his gut was telling him. But the evidence was pointing in one direction. Can Marcus really be capable of this? James spent 2 more weeks gathering information before he went to Daniel. He needed to be sure. He had the forensic accountant follow the money trail as far as possible. They found transfers to offshore accounts, payments to companies that didn't exist, a complex web of financial deception that required intimate knowledge of the business. And the only person besides Daniel who had that level of access was Marcus. When James finally called Daniel and asked to meet, Daniel sounded exhausted. "Is this important, James? I'm dealing with a lot right now." "It's important," James said firmly. "Trust me." They met at a coffee shop far from Daniel's office. James brought a folder full of documents, bank statements, transfer records, company registration papers for shell corporations. He slid the folder across the table. "I need you to look at this. And I need you to stay calm." Daniel opened the folder, confused. As he read through the pages, his confusion turned to shock, then to disbelief. "These are my company's accounts. Where did you get this?" "I had someone investigate," James said quietly. "Daniel, someone has been stealing from you. For years. Over $1 million has been siphoned out through fake expenses and shell companies." Daniel's hands shook as he flipped through pages. Which employee did this?" James took a deep breath. "It's not an employee, Daniel. The accounts, the transfers, the timing. They all point to someone with complete access and trust. Someone you never would have suspected." He paused, hating what he had to say next. "They'd point to Marcus." Daniel's face went pale. He looked like he'd been punched. No, that's impossible." "Marcus is helping me. He's the only one who—" Then he stopped. The words died in his throat. Because suddenly, everything made terrible sense. Marcus's constant presence. His access to everything. His perfect timing. The way problems always seemed to get worse no matter what Daniel did. The way Marcus was always there to comfort him, to offer help, to be the good brother. "Oh my God," Daniel whispered. His eyes filled with tears. It was him. The whole time, it was him. James reached across the table. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry." Daniel sat there, staring at the documents, watching his entire reality reconstruct itself. Every conversation with Marcus replayed in his mind, but now with new context. Every hug, every piece of advice, every moment of brotherly support, all of it was a lie. All of it was part of the destruction. He'd been thinking the person who was killing him. How do you process the betrayal when it comes from the one person you thought would never hurt you? Daniel didn't sleep for 3 days after learning the truth. He sat in his apartment going through every document James had given him, cross-referencing dates, tracing money trails, piecing together the elaborate web of lies Marcus had woven. Every discovery felt like another knife in his back. The consulting fees to companies that didn't exist. The emergency expenses that never happened. The tax payments to fake government accounts. All of it led back to Marcus. But it wasn't just about the money. As Daniel dug deeper, he found evidence of other manipulations, emails sent from dummy accounts to competitors, anonymous tips that had cost him contracts, carefully planted rumors that destroyed his reputation. Marcus hadn't just stolen from him. Marcus had orchestrated his complete destruction while pretending to be his savior. The cruelest part was realizing how perfectly Marcus had played him. Every time Daniel had felt grateful to Marcus, Marcus had actually just committed another act of sabotage. When Marcus found financial errors, he'd created those errors. When Marcus offered comfort during the divorce, Marcus had helped cause the divorce. Daniel had thanked him, hugged him, told him he was the only person he could trust. The shame of it made Daniel physically ill. On the third night, Daniel knew what he had to do. He couldn't go to the police yet. He needed to confront Marcus first. He needed to hear it from his brother's own mouth. He needed to understand why. He called Marcus and asked him to come to their mother's house. "It's important. Mom wants to see both of us." Marcus agreed immediately, his voice filled with false concern. "Is she okay? Is something wrong?" "Just come," Daniel said and hung up. When Marcus arrived that Sunday afternoon, he found Daniel and their mother sitting in the living room, the same room where they'd spent countless Christmases, birthdays, family gatherings, the room that held decades of memories. Helen looked frail and confused, her health declining rapidly from stress and heartbreak. She didn't know why Daniel had insisted she be there. Marcus walked in with his usual calm demeanor, that quiet, gentle smile. "Hey, what's going on?" Daniel stood up slowly, his hands shaking. He held a folder, the same one James had given him. "Sit down, Marcus." Something in Daniel's voice made Marcus pause. His smile flickered. "Daniel, what?" "Sit down." Marcus sat. His eyes darted between Daniel and their mother, calculating, trying to understand what was happening. Daniel opened the folder and pulled out documents, letting them fall onto the coffee table like accusations. Bank statements, transfer records, shell company registrations. "I know what you did," Daniel said, his voice shaking with controlled rage. "I know everything. When the truth finally comes to light, can you still pretend to be innocent?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus stared at the documents on the table, his face unreadable. Their mother looked between her sons, confused and frightened. "What's going on?" Helen asked weakly. "What is Daniel talking about?" Daniel's eyes never left Marcus. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Marcus sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in his expression. The mask he'd worn for years began to crack. The concerned brother, the helpful son, the loyal family member, all of it melted away like ice under heat. What remained was something cold and hard. "Tell her what?" Marcus said quietly. "Tell her how you've been stealing from me for years?" Daniel's voice rose. "How you destroyed my business, my marriage? How you've been sabotaging everything while pretending to help me." Helen gasped, her hand going to her chest. "Marcus, no. Tell me this isn't true." Marcus looked at his mother, then at Daniel. And then, to Daniel's shock, Marcus smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not an apologetic smile. A cold, satisfied smile that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Yes," Marcus said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Helen made a small, wounded sound. Daniel felt his legs go weak. "Yes?" Daniel repeated, his voice breaking. "That's all you have to say?" "Yes." Marcus leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. After years of hiding, of pretending, of playing a role, he suddenly looked relieved, free. "What do you want me to say, Daniel?" "That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake. That I didn't mean to." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I meant every single thing I did. Every dollar I took. Every contract you lost. Every rumor I spread. All of it." Daniel staggered backward, gripping the back of a chair for support. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" "To us? We're family." And that's when Marcus's composure finally broke. Not into tears or remorse, but into rage. Years of suppressed anger came pouring out like poison from a wound. "Family?" Marcus stood up, his voice rising for the first time in years. "You want to talk about family? Where was my family when I was 7 years old and everyone forgot my birthday? Where was my family when I graduated and no one showed up? How much pain can one person hold before it transforms into something unrecognizable?" Marcus was shaking now, years of carefully controlled emotion erupting all at once. Do you remember our childhood, Daniel? Do you actually remember it? Or were you too busy being the golden child to notice that I existed? Daniel tried to speak, but Marcus cut him off. Every single achievement you had, they threw a party. Every single achievement I had, I got a pat on the head and good job. Do you know what that feels like? To work twice as hard and get half the love. Helen was crying now, reaching toward Marcus. Honey, we didn't. Don't, Marcus snapped, turning to her. Don't tell me you didn't mean it. Don't tell me you loved us equally. I heard you, Mom, that night when I was 17. I heard Dad say I'd be fine on my own, like I didn't need you. Like I didn't matter. Tears were streaming down Helen's face. Marcus, we never meant to make you feel, but you did. Marcus shouted. You made me feel invisible. And when Dad died, when I thought maybe finally he'd see me, acknowledge me, what did I get? $50,000 and a note saying I'd be fine. Daniel got millions. Daniel got the business. Daniel got everything. Marcus turned back to Daniel, his eyes blazing. So, yes, I destroyed your business. Yes, I helped ruin your marriage. Yes, I've been systematically taking everything from you. Because you took everything from me first. You just didn't notice because you never noticed me. Daniel's face was wet with tears. Marcus, I was a kid. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care. Marcus's voice cracked. None of you cared. I could have disappeared and you wouldn't have noticed for weeks. So I decided if I couldn't have a family, neither could you. If I had to be invisible, I'd make you all see what it feels like to lose everything. The room was silent except for Helen's soft sobbing. Daniel stared at his brother, this stranger who looked like Marcus, but was someone he'd never really known. You destroyed Mom too, Daniel whispered. Look at her. She's dying from the stress. Did you want that? For the first time, Marcus's expression faltered. He looked at his mother, really looked at her pale, thin, broken. Something flickered across his face. Regret? Guilt? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I didn't want to hurt Mom, Marcus said quietly. But she made her choices. You all did. He walked to the door, then turned back one last time. You can call the police. I don't care. I already won. Look at what's left of this family. Nothing. And with that, Marcus walked out, leaving behind the shattered remains of the only family he'd ever known. Is revenge still sweet when you realize you've destroyed yourself in the process? Marcus didn't run. He didn't pack a bag and disappear into the night like a criminal fleeing justice. Instead, he went home to his apartment, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. He felt strangely empty, like a balloon that had finally been deflated after years of being stretched too tight. The confession had been liberating in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time in his life, he'd been completely honest with his family. No masks, no pretending, no swallowing his pain to make everyone else comfortable. They finally saw him, really saw him. Even if what they saw was a monster. His phone started ringing within an hour. Daniel, then his mother. Then numbers he didn't recognize, probably the police, probably lawyers. Marcus let them all go to voicemail. He sat in the silence and waited. He knew what was coming. The next morning, 2 detectives knocked on his door. Marcus opened it calmly, already dressed, already prepared. Marcus Harrington? One of them asked. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. I know, Marcus said simply. He held out his wrists. I'm ready. The detectives exchanged surprised glances. Most criminals didn't make their jobs this easy. They read him his rights as they put on the handcuffs. Marcus listened to the familiar words from countless TV shows, but hearing them applied to his own life felt surreal. You have the right to remain silent. But Marcus didn't want to remain silent anymore. He'd been silent his whole life. At the police station, they put him in an interrogation room called Metal Table. Uncomfortable chairs, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. A detective sat across from him with a recorder. "You have the right to an attorney," the detective said. "Would you like one present?" "No," Marcus replied. "I'm going to tell you everything." And he did. For 3 hours, Marcus confessed to everything in methodical detail. How he'd created shell companies. How he'd siphoned money over years. How he'd leaked business secrets. How he'd manipulated his brother's personal relationships. The detective kept expecting him to stop, to ask for a lawyer, to show some sense of self-preservation. But Marcus just kept talking, calm and factual, like he was explaining a business plan. "Why are you confessing to all this?" The detective finally asked. "You could make us prove every charge. Instead, you're handing us everything on a silver platter." Marcus looked at him with those cold, empty eyes. "Because I want them to know it was me. I want Daniel to know, my mother to know, everyone to know that I did this. That's the whole point. If they didn't know it was me, then the revenge would be meaningless." The detective sat back, disturbed by the honesty. "Do you feel any remorse?" Marcus thought about that question for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I feel satisfied, like I finally finished something I started a long time ago. Can confession be an act of pride instead of repentance?" The trial was quick because Marcus pled guilty to every single charge. His court-appointed lawyer begged him to reconsider, to let them build a defense, to at least try to reduce his sentence. "Your family neglected you," the lawyer argued. "We could use that. Emotional abuse, psychological trauma, we could get you a reduced sentence, maybe even probation with therapy." But Marcus refused. "I don't want a reduced sentence. I'm guilty. I did everything they're accusing me of. I want them to know that." The courtroom was packed the day of sentencing. Daniel sat in the front row with James Sullivan beside him for support. Helen was too sick to attend. She was in the hospital. Again, her heart literally breaking from the stress of what her family had become. Amanda was there too, sitting far from Daniel, her face a mixture of horror and guilt. She trusted Marcus, confided in him, let him into her life while he was destroying everything around her. When Marcus was led into the courtroom in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, people gasped. He looked different than her, paler, but also strangely peaceful, like he'd finally found the rest he'd been seeking. The judge read through the charges: embezzlement of over $1.2 million, wire fraud, identity theft, corporate sabotage. Each charge carried its own weight, its own consequence. Then came the victim impact statements. Daniel was called to the stand first. He walked up slowly, looking at Marcus for the first time since that day at their mother's house. "I want to understand," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "I've spent months trying to understand how my brother, the person I trusted most in the world, could do this to me. To our family." Marcus met his eyes without flinching. "You had a brother who sat in silence at every family dinner while you talked about yourself. You had a brother who achieved things no one ever celebrated. You had a brother who needed you, and you never even noticed he was there." Daniel's tears fell freely now. "I was a kid, Marcus. Kids are selfish." "I didn't know." "Exactly," Marcus interrupted, even though he wasn't supposed to speak. "You didn't know, none of you knew, and that's the problem." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Harrington, you'll have your chance to speak." But Daniel wasn't finished. "You destroyed everything. My business, my marriage, my relationship with my daughter. Mom is dying because of the stress. And for what? Because we didn't pay enough attention to you?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "Because attention, acknowledgement, love, those things matter. And you all acted like I didn't deserve them. When does an explanation become an excuse, and when does it become the terrible truth?" When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood at the podium and addressed the courtroom with the same calm demeanor he'd had throughout the entire process. "I don't expect forgiveness," Marcus began. "I don't expect understanding. I'm not asking for mercy or sympathy. I did what I did with full knowledge of the consequences." He paused, looking directly at Daniel. "For 30 years, I was invisible. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't need attention, the one who would be fine. And everyone believed it because it was easier than actually seeing me." His voice remained steady, emotionless. "I watched my brother get everything: love, support, inheritance, opportunity. Not because he earned it more than me, but because he was more visible, more charming, more there. And I realized that in my family, I would always be background noise. So I decided to become the loudest silence they'd ever heard. I decided to make them feel what I felt: powerless, alone, watching everything they cared about disappear while being unable to stop it. And I succeeded." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "The question everyone keeps asking is, do I regret it?" Marcus continued. "The answer is complicated. I regret hurting my mother. She didn't deserve that. But Daniel, the family that forgot me? No, I don't regret making them see me, even if they only saw me as a villain." He turned to face the judge. "I'm guilty of every charge. I planned it, executed it, and I'd probably do it again if given the chance. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I mattered, even if I only mattered as the person who destroyed everything." The judge looked at Marcus with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mr. Harrington, you've caused immeasurable harm to your family. You've destroyed lives, ruined businesses, and broken hearts. Your actions were calculated, cruel, and unforgivable." Marcus nodded. "I know. I'm sentencing you to 12 years in federal prison," the judge declared. "You'll be eligible for parole after 8, but given your lack of remorse, I wouldn't count on it." Marcus stood still as the sentence was read. 12 years. He'd be almost 45 when he got out. His youth, his freedom, his future all traded for revenge. And as they led him away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back one more time to look at Daniel. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Daniel was crying, broken, destroyed. Marcus felt nothing. No satisfaction. No regret. Just emptiness. Because the truth was, revenge hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't filled the hole inside him. It hadn't made him feel loved or seen or valued. It had just made him alone in a different way. In destroying his family, had Marcus destroyed the only chance he ever had of being whole? Prison was exactly what Marcus expected: cold, gray, and routine. He was sent to a medium-security federal facility 3 hours from where he grew up, far enough that visitors would have to make a deliberate effort to see him. Not that he expected any visitors. His cell was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a metal bed, a thin mattress, a toilet, and a tiny desk bolted to the wall. His cellmate was a man named Rico, serving time for tax evasion, who kept to himself and appreciated that Marcus did the same. The days blurred together in monotonous sameness: wake up at 6, breakfast at 7, work detail or recreation, lunch, more work or classes, dinner, then lockdown. Marcus fell into the rhythm easily, almost gratefully. There was something peaceful about having no choices, no decisions, no masks to wear. In prison, everyone knew what you were. There was no pretending. The other inmates learned quickly that Marcus wasn't someone to mess with, not because he was violent or intimidating, but because he simply didn't care. When someone tried to take his food, Marcus just stared at them with those empty eyes and said, "Go ahead." Something about that indifference unsettled people more than aggression would have. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the Harrington family tried to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. But some things once broken can't be put back together. Daniel's business collapsed completely within 6 months of Marcus's sentencing. The combination of stolen money, lost clients, and destroyed reputation was too much to overcome. Daniel had to file for bankruptcy, sell off assets, and lay off every employee. The company his father had built over 40 years died quietly, its legacy reduced to a cautionary tale in business journals about the dangers of internal fraud. Daniel moved into a small apartment, took a job as a regional manager for someone else's logistics company, and tried to rebuild. But he was haunted. Every decision he made, he second-guessed. Every person who offered help, he suspected. His brother had destroyed more than his business. Marcus had destroyed his ability to trust. The supervised visits with Sophie were painful. She was only 8 years old, too young to understand why Daddy didn't have the big house anymore, why he seemed sad all the time, why Uncle Marcus was in jail. Did Uncle Marcus do something bad? She asked one day during a visit to the park. Daniel didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a child that the uncle who used to bring her presents and play games with her had been secretly destroying her family? Uncle Marcus made some very bad choices, Daniel said carefully. And now he has to be away for a while. Will he say sorry? Sophie asked with the innocent logic of childhood. Daniel felt his throat tighten. No, sweetheart. I don't think he will. Can a family survive when the foundation of trust has been burned to ashes? Helen Harrington never recovered. The stress of the trial, the revelation of Marcus's betrayal, the collapse of everything she built with her late husband, it was too much for her heart to bear. She had another episode 3 months after Marcus was sentenced, this time more severe. Daniel rushed to the hospital to find her in the ICU, hooked up to machines, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed. The doctors said her heart was failing. They could do surgery, but at her age, with her stress levels, the chances weren't good. Does she know? Helen whispered when she was awake, her voice barely audible. Daniel didn't need to ask what she meant. Yes, Mom. She knows Marcus is in prison. Helen's eyes filled with tears. This is my fault. I failed him. I failed both of you. Mom, no, Daniel tried to say, but Helen shook her head weakly. I did, I see it now. We loved you more visibly. We celebrated you more loudly. Marcus was always so capable, so independent, we thought he didn't need us as much. Her breathing was labored. But everyone needs to be seen. Everyone needs to matter. And we made him invisible. She gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength. Go see him. Please, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I love him. Tell him... She started coughing and nurses rushed in. Daniel was ushered out of the room while they stabilized her. He stood in the hallway, his mother's words echoing in his head. Go see him! Could he do that? Could he face Marcus again after everything? Helen never got the chance to tell Marcus herself. She died 2 days later, peacefully in her sleep, her heart finally giving out under the weight of grief and guilt. The funeral was small, just Daniel, Amanda, Sophie, a few old family friends. Helen had outlived most of her generation. As they lowered her casket into the ground, right next to where their father was buried, Daniel felt utterly alone. He'd lost his wife, his business, his mother, and his brother all within 3 years. The prison sent Marcus a notification about his mother's death. He was given the option to attend the funeral under guard, wearing shackles. Marcus declined. When the warden asked why, Marcus simply said, "There's nothing left to say." But that night, alone in his cell, Marcus lay on his thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since his arrest, he cried. Not sobbing, not loudly, just silent tears running down his face in the darkness. Because despite everything, despite the hate and the revenge and the destruction, she was still his mother. And now she was gone. And he would never be able to tell her that somewhere buried under all the rage, he'd still loved her. Do we only recognize love when it's too late to do anything about it? A year after Helen's death, Daniel finally decided to visit Marcus in prison. He thought about it constantly, drafted letters he never sent, picked up the phone 100 times and never dialed. But something inside him needed closure, needed to understand, needed to know if any part of his brother was still in there. The prison visiting room was depressing beige walls, metal tables bolted to the floor, vending machines humming in the corner, guards stationed at every exit. Daniel sat at one of the tables, his hand shaking, wondering if Marcus would even agree to see him. When Marcus walked in, Daniel barely recognized him. Prison had changed him. He was thinner, harder somehow, his eyes more distant. But he walked with that same quiet presence, that same ability to seem smaller than he was. Their eyes met across the room. Marcus hesitated for just a moment, then walked over and sat down across from Daniel. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "Mom's grave has fresh flowers every week," Daniel finally said. "I make sure of that." Marcus nodded slightly, but said nothing. "She asked me to tell you something before she died," Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She said it was her fault, that she failed you, that she was sorry." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his expression didn't change. "She wanted you to know she loved you," Daniel pressed. "That she always loved you, even if she didn't show it the right way." "It's too late," Marcus said quietly. Those were his first words. "I know," Daniel agreed. "But I thought you should know anyway." Another long silence. Then Daniel leaned forward. "I'm not here for me, Marcus. I'm here because I need to understand. Was it worth it? Destroying everything, our family, the business, Mom's health, your own freedom, was it worth it?" Marcus looked at his brother with those empty eyes. "I spent 30 years invisible, 3 years visible as the villain, and now 12 years invisible again." He paused. "At least for those 3 years, everyone knew I existed. So yes, it was worth it." Daniel felt something break inside him. "You destroyed Mom for 3 years of being noticed?" "I destroyed a version of our family that was already broken," Marcus corrected. "You just didn't see the cracks because they benefited you. We were kids, Marcus." Daniel's voice rose, drawing looks from guards. He lowered it, leaning in closer. "I was a stupid, self-absorbed kid. Kids don't see beyond themselves. And Mom and Dad, they made mistakes, but they didn't deserve what you did to them. Didn't they?" Marcus challenged. "They created me. This version of me, the one sitting here in prison, they built this. Every forgotten birthday. Every missed event. Every time they chose you over me. They built this monster brick by brick, and then they acted surprised when it finally appeared." Daniel shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "There had to be another way. You could have talked to us, gone to therapy, moved away and started over. Anything but this?" Marcus almost smiled. Almost. "Would you have listened? Really listened? Or would you have patted me on the back and told me I was overreacting, that I was fine, that everything was fine?" The question hung between them, unanswered. Because both of them knew the truth. When someone tells you they're hurting and you don't listen, are you responsible for what they become? 6 months after Daniel's visit, a team of psychologists came to the prison to study Marcus as part of a research project on familial revenge crimes. Marcus agreed to participate, not because he wanted help or redemption, but because he was curious what they'd find. The lead psychologist was Dr. Sarah Cheen, a woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and personality disorders. She sat across from Marcus in a private room, recording equipment between them, and started with a simple question. "Tell me about your earliest memory of feeling invisible." Marcus thought for a moment, then began to speak in that same calm, detached voice he always used. "I was maybe 5 years old. Daniel had just been born and everyone was obsessed with him. I remember standing at the hospital window, looking at him in the nursery, and my aunt was there saying how beautiful he was, how perfect. I tugged on her sleeve and said, "I'm here too." She patted my head without looking at me and said, "Yes, sweetie," and kept staring at Daniel. Dr. Chun made notes. "How did that make you feel?" "Like I'd been replaced before I even had a chance to matter," Marcus said without emotion. Like there was a limited amount of love in the family, and Daniel had taken it all just by being born. Over several sessions, Dr. Chun built a psychological profile of Marcus. What she found disturbed her not because Marcus was a psychopath or sociopath in the traditional sense, but because he was something more complicated. He had developed what she called inverse empathy. Marcus could understand other people's emotions perfectly, could predict their reactions, could manipulate their feelings, but he disconnected from his own emotions so completely that he felt nothing about the pain he caused. "You're highly intelligent," Dr. Chun observed during one session. "You tested in the top 2%. You have excellent emotional intelligence. By all measures, you should have been successful, fulfilled." "What went wrong?" Marcus looked at her with those cold eyes. "Nothing went wrong. I adapted. When you're a child and you learn that expressing pain gets you nothing, you stop expressing it. When you learn that asking for attention makes you seem needy, you stop asking. When you learn that your feelings don't matter to anyone else, you stop letting them matter to you." "But they did matter," Dr. Chun pressed. "Clearly they mattered very much, or you wouldn't have spent years planning revenge." Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "You're right. They did matter. They mattered so much that I had to kill that part of myself to survive. And once it was dead, all that was left was the plan. The plan became my purpose, my identity, the only thing that made me feel alive. What happens to a person when the only way to feel alive is through destruction?" Dr. Chun interviewed Daniel and reviewed Helen's medical records as part of her research. She was building a case study on what she termed invisible child syndrome with delayed vindictive response. In her professional opinion, Marcus represented a rare but real phenomenon, someone who internalizes childhood neglect so deeply that it transforms into something dangerous years or even decades later. The average person who experiences childhood neglect either acts out immediately or develops depression, anxiety, and relationship problems in adulthood, Dr. Chun explained to her colleagues during a presentation on Marcus's case. But Marcus did neither. He adapted by becoming perfectly functional on the surface while internally detaching from all emotional needs. He became the easy child, no problems, no demands, no drama. And his family rewarded that adaptation by giving him even less attention. She clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of Marcus's life. For 30 years, he maintained this adaptation. He was successful by conventional measures, good grades, stable job, no criminal record. But inside, he was keeping a ledger. Every slight, every forgotten moment, every comparison to his brother, he recorded it all emotionally, even if he wasn't consciously aware of it. Then came the trigger event, the father's death, and the will reading. This wasn't just about the money or the business. It was the final confirmation of what Marcus had always believed, that he didn't matter. That even in death, his father saw him as fine on his own. That was the moment when 30 years of suppressed pain converted into a clear purpose. Make them feel what I felt. One of her colleagues raised a hand. "But why not just cut them off? Why the elaborate revenge?" "Because cutting them off wouldn't make them understand," Dr. Chun explained. "It wouldn't make them see him. Marcus didn't just want to hurt them. He wanted them to know with absolute certainty that he was the one who did it. He wanted to transform from invisible to unforgettable. And in that, he succeeded. His family will never forget him now." The research team sat in silence, unsettled by the case. Finally, someone asked, "Is there any hope for rehabilitation? Any chance Marcus could reintegrate into society?" Dr. Chung closed her folder and sighed. Marcus doesn't want rehabilitation. He sees his actions as justice, not crime. He's not sorry, he's satisfied. The question isn't whether we can rehabilitate him, it's whether someone like Marcus, who has spent his entire life being invisible, can ever feel whole in any way other than destruction. Can he fix someone who doesn't believe they're broken? In a private session near the end of the study, Dr. Chen asked Marcus a question that had been bothering her. If you could go back and change one thing not to avoid prison, but to actually change your life, what would it be? Marcus stared at the wall for a long time before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "I'd want to be 5 years old again, standing at that hospital window looking at Daniel. And instead of my aunt ignoring me, I'd want her to pick me up, hold me close, and say, 'You're still special. You're still loved.' Nothing changes that. I'd want to believe her." Dr. Chen felt her throat tighten. Would that have changed everything? "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe I was always going to end up here. Maybe some people are just born into the wrong family, the wrong circumstances, the wrong version of themselves. Maybe I was always going to be the villain in this story." "Do you think of yourself as a villain?" Dr. Chen asked. Marcus finally looked at her, and for just a moment, she saw something human behind those empty eyes, something hurt and lost and impossibly sad. "I think I'm a person who stopped existing as myself a long time ago. The Marcus who wanted to be loved died when he was 17, standing in that hallway listening to his father say he'd be fine alone. What's left is just ... A response. A very long, very calculated response to a lifetime of pain. And now?" Dr. Chen pressed. "Now what happens to that response?" Marcus's brief vulnerability vanished, replaced by the familiar coldness. "Now I serve my time. I read books. I exist. And in 8 to 12 years, I'll be released into a world where I have no family, no home, no purpose. I'll be invisible again, just in a different way." "Does that scare you?" "No," Marcus said simply. "I've been preparing for loneliness my entire life. This is just the next chapter." Dr. Chen published her findings in a psychology journal under the title "The Architecture of Invisible Rage, a Case. Study in Delayed Familial Revenge." The paper became controversial in academic circles. Some praised it for its insight into childhood neglect. Others criticized it for seeming to excuse Marcus's actions. But everyone who read it came away with the same unsettling question. How many invisible children are out there right now, quietly keeping their own ledgers, waiting for the moment when their pain transforms into something the world can't ignore? When we fail to see the pain in front of us, what monsters are we creating for tomorrow? 5 years after Marcus was imprisoned, Daniel sat in his therapist's office for his weekly session. Therapy had become a lifeline for him, the only place where he could process the complex tangle of emotions that Marcus's betrayal had left behind. His therapist, Dr. Linda Morrison, was patient and skilled at helping Daniel untangle guilt from responsibility, victimhood from complicity. "I still dream about him," Daniel said, staring at his hands. "Not nightmares exactly, just ... memories, but now they're all different. Every happy memory from our childhood is poisoned because I keep wondering, was he suffering even then? Was I really that blind?" Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "You were a child, Daniel. Children aren't responsible for seeing things adults miss." "But I wasn't always a child," Daniel countered. "I was an adult for years before this happened. I had opportunities to notice, to ask, to care. And I didn't." He paused, his voice breaking. "I didn't see him, Linda, my own brother, and I just didn't see him." This was the guilt that ate at Daniel constantly, not just that Marcus had destroyed everything, but that maybe in some terrible way, Marcus had been right. Maybe they had failed him first. Daniel had spent years reviewing his memories, looking for signs he'd missed. And the more he looked, the more he found. Marcus sitting quietly at family dinners while everyone talked over him. Marcus's small achievements that went uncelebrated. The way their parents would ask Daniel detailed questions about his life, but give Marcus only superficial attention. I remember one Christmas, Daniel said slowly, I got a new gaming system and Marcus got socks and a gift card. I thought it was weird at the time, but I was too excited about my present to really think about it. Now, I wonder how many Christmases was it like that? How many times did we make him feel like an afterthought? Dr. Morrison made a note. You're taking on responsibility for your parents' actions too. That's not entirely fair to yourself. Maybe not, Daniel admitted, but I benefited from those actions. I got the love, the attention, the inheritance. I didn't ask for it, but I also never questioned it. I never thought to myself, hey, maybe Marcus needs some of this too. I just ... Took it all and assumed it was normal. The truth was, Daniel's entire identity had been built on being the favored son. And now, looking back, he felt ashamed of the person he'd been not intentionally cruel, but carelessly self-absorbed. How do you live with the knowledge that your happiness was built on someone else's pain? Daniel's relationship with his daughter Sophie became both his salvation and his greatest challenge. She was 13 now, asking harder questions, old enough to understand more of what had happened, but still young enough to be deeply affected by it. Why did Uncle Marcus hate us? She asked one day during their weekend together. They were at a park watching other families play, and the question came out of nowhere. Daniel had been dreading this conversation for years. He didn't hate us, Daniel said carefully. Or maybe he did. It's complicated, sweetie. That's what adults always say when they don't want to explain something, Sophie challenged. She'd inherited her mother's sharp mind. Daniel sighed and decided to try honesty. Uncle Marcus felt like we didn't love him enough. Like we forgot about him or ignored him. And instead of telling us how he felt, he kept it all inside until it turned into something really angry and destructive. But that's his fault then, Sophie said with teenage certainty. If he didn't tell you, how were you supposed to know? You're right, Daniel agreed. But also, we should have noticed. We should have paid attention. Sometimes people are hurting and they don't say anything because they don't think anyone will care. And when no one notices, it makes them feel even more invisible. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing. Do I make people feel invisible? The question hit Daniel hard. His daughter was asking the question he should have asked himself decades ago. I don't think so, Daniel said. But it's good that you're thinking about it. It's good that you're aware that other people have feelings even when they don't show them. I miss him sometimes, Sophie admitted quietly. The old Uncle Marcus. The one who used to play games with me and bring me presents. Was that real or was he just pretending? Daniel had asked himself the same question countless times. I think some of it was real. I think Marcus did love you. But he was also using our family time to get information, to stay close, so he could hurt us. Both things can be true at the same time. He loved you, and he was destroying us. Sophie looked at her father with eyes too wise for her age. Are you going to end up like him? All angry and alone? The question terrified Daniel because he'd wondered the same thing. He could feel himself carrying Marcus's poison, the inability to trust, the constant second-guessing, the fear of being vulnerable. I'm trying not to, Daniel said honestly. That's why I go to therapy. That's why I'm working on being present with you, even when it's hard. I don't want Marcus's revenge to win by turning me into a broken person. Can trauma be inherited, passed from victim to victim like a curse? Amanda had her own reckoning with Marcus's betrayal. She'd married Daniel, loved him, built a life with him, and then watched Marcus help dismantle it while pretending to be her friend. The guilt of having trust in Marcus, of having confided in him, of having let him into their lives so completely haunted her. "I feel so stupid," she told her own therapist. "He was there through the whole divorce, listening to me complain about Daniel, and the whole time he was the reason Daniel was falling apart. How did I not see it?" Her therapist asked gently, "What would you have been looking for?" "I don't know," Amanda admitted. "Some sign that he was lying? Some indication that he wasn't trustworthy? But he was so perfect, so understanding and supportive and kind. He never pushed boundaries, never made me uncomfortable. He was exactly what I needed when I needed it." "That's because he was manipulating you," her therapist pointed out. "Manipulation by skilled people is invisible. That's what makes it manipulation." But Amanda couldn't let go of the guilt. She'd left Daniel partly because Marcus had convinced her that Daniel was the problem. Marcus had whispered doubts that Amanda had then believed were her own thoughts. How much of her decision to divorce had been her choice, and how much had been Marcus's influence? She'd remarried now a kind man named Robert who worked in education and had never met the Harrington family. But sometimes, late at night, she'd lie awake and wonder, what if she'd fought harder for her marriage? What if she'd questioned Marcus's advice? What if she'd seen through the manipulation? Would Daniel have survived the business collapse better with his family intact? Would Helen still be alive without the stress of the divorce? The what-ifs consumed her. She'd started attending a support group for people who'd been manipulated by family members. Hearing other stories helped. She wasn't alone in having been deceived by someone she trusted. But it didn't erase the guilt or answer the fundamental question that haunted all of them. How responsible were they for creating Marcus? And how responsible was Marcus for choosing destruction over healing? "The therapist says we were all victims," Amanda told Daniel during one of their rare conversations about co-parenting. "That Marcus victimized all of us?" "Maybe," Daniel said. "But we were also the people who created the environment that made him into what he became. Both things can be true." They stood in silence, two people who'd once loved each other, now connected only by their daughter and their shared trauma. Two people trying to figure out how to live with the knowledge that they'd been part of something terrible, even if they hadn't understood it at the time. When everyone in a story is both victim and perpetrator, how do you assign blame? Dr. Sarah Chan's case study on Marcus became required reading in family therapy programs across the country. Universities used it to teach future therapists about the long-term effects of childhood emotional neglect. The Harrington family, though their real names were changed, became a cautionary tale, a perfect example of how seemingly small acts of neglect can compound over years into something catastrophic. In lecture halls, professors would present Marcus's case and ask students, at what point could intervention have changed this outcome? Some students argued it was early childhood if Helen and her husband had recognized the differential treatment and corrected it. Others said it was adolescence. Marcus had been in therapy to process his feelings of invisibility. Some believed it was young adulthood if Marcus had chosen to set boundaries or cut contact rather than seek revenge. But a few students, the ones who understood trauma most deeply, argued that there was no single intervention point because the damage happened incrementally, like erosion wearing away stone. This wasn't one traumatic event, one graduate student presented during a seminar. This was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each individual moment, the forgotten birthday, the missed graduation, the overlooked achievement seems almost insignificant on its own. But together, over 30 years, they created a person who fundamentally believed he didn't matter to anyone. The professor nodded. So what's the lesson? That we need to treat every child equally. No, another student interjected. Equal treatment isn't the answer. Different children need different things. The lesson is visibility. Every child needs to feel seen, acknowledged, and valued. Marcus's tragedy was that he learned to be invisible because being visible got him nothing. This concept and need for visibility became the core lesson that therapists extracted from Marcus's case. It wasn't about perfect parenting or equal distribution of attention. It was about ensuring every child in a family felt that they mattered, that their presence made a difference, that they were missed when they were gone. Family therapists began using what they called the Marcus question with parents. If your child disappeared for a week, would you notice? Not physically, emotionally. Would you notice the specific absence of who they are? Or would life just continue without disruption? The question was designed to make parents uncomfortable, to force them to confront whether they truly saw each of their children as individuals with unique needs, feelings, and internal lives. How many families are creating their own Marcus right now, one small neglect at a time? But the lesson of Marcus's story wasn't just for families, it was for society. The case sparked broader discussions about how we treat people who seem fine, who don't demand attention, who quietly carry their pain. Psychologists began talking about invisible burden syndrome, the phenomena of people who appear functional but are actually drowning inside, and whose eventual breakdown surprises everyone because they seemed okay. We reward people for suffering quietly, Dr. Chen wrote in her follow-up article. We call them low maintenance and easygoing and independent. We celebrate their ability to handle things without help. But what we're actually doing is teaching them that their needs don't matter, that asking for help is weakness, that their pain is an inconvenience to others. And then we're shocked when that pain transforms into something destructive. She used Marcus as an example of how society's attitude toward emotional needs can be toxic. Marcus learned early that expressing pain or need resulted in nothing, no help. No acknowledgement, just discomfort from others. So he stopped expressing it. His family praised him for being the easy one, without realizing they were praising him for self-abandonment. By the time he was an adult, he'd so thoroughly disconnected from his emotional needs that he could only feel alive through revenge. The article went viral online, sparking heated debates. Some people argued that Marcus's story excused his actions, that it turned him into a victim rather than acknowledging him as a perpetrator. Others argued that understanding the roots of destructive behavior wasn't the same as excusing it, that we could hold Marcus accountable while also learning from what created him. No one is born wanting to destroy their family, one popular response article read. Destruction is learned. It's a response to pain that has no other outlet. Marcus isn't unique, he's just the extreme end of a spectrum that millions of people exist on. How many invisible children grow up to have depression, anxiety, relationship problems, or self-destructive behaviors? Marcus chose revenge, but others choose different forms of self-harm. The root cause is the same, not being seen. Online forums filled with people sharing their own experiences of being the invisible child in their families. Thousands of stories poured in people who'd been overlooked, forgotten, treated as background characters in their own families. Most hadn't become criminals, but many described the deep psychological scars. Difficulty trusting others, feeling inherently unlovable, struggling with self-worth, or having complicated relationships with their families. I'm the Marcus in my family, minus the revenge, one person wrote. I just disappeared instead. Cut contact, moved across the country, started over. My family barely noticed. That should tell you everything. How many people are one bad day away from becoming Marcus, and how would we ever know until it's too late? Perhaps the most uncomfortable lesson from Marcus's story was this: there are no clear villains. People wanted to blame Helen and her husband for being bad parents, but by most measures they provided for their children, weren't abusive, genuinely thought they were doing their best. They wanted to blame Daniel for being self-absorbed, but he was just a kid who became the adult his parents shaped him to be. They wanted to blame Marcus for choosing destruction over healing, but after 30 years of learning that his pain didn't matter, what other language did he have? The tragedy of the Harrington family, Dr. Chun concluded in her final paper, is that everyone was acting according to their understanding of the world, and that understanding was fundamentally broken. The parents believe that children who don't complain don't need help. Daniel believed that if Marcus had a problem, he'd say something. Marcus believed that his pain was invisible because it was unimportant. All of these beliefs were wrong, but they made sense within the family system that created them. She included interviews with other family members' aunts, uncles, family friends, and found a consistent theme. Everyone had noticed something was off with Marcus, but no one had felt it was their place to intervene. They'd all assumed the parents were handling it, or that Marcus was just naturally quiet, or that it wasn't their business. Evil thrives in the passive space between awareness and action, Dr. Chin wrote. Multiple people noticed Marcus's invisibility over the years, but noticing isn't the same as doing something. Everyone assumed someone else would handle it, and so no one did. Marcus fell through the cracks not because of one person's failure, but because of everyone's collective inaction. The final, most painful lesson was about redemption, or rather, its absence. Unlike in movies or books, there was no moment where Marcus suddenly realized his mistake. No tearful reconciliation, no healing. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some pain is too deep to fix. Some families, once broken, can't be repaired. We want to believe that acknowledgement and understanding lead to forgiveness, Dr. Chen wrote. But Marcus's story teaches us that some damage is permanent. You can understand why someone became a monster without that monster transforming back into a person. You can acknowledge your role in creating pain without that acknowledgement undoing the consequences. Some mistakes, some neglects, some cruelties, they can't be taken back. They can only be learned from, so that hopefully the next family doesn't make the same choices. If the lesson is that we must see each other, really see each other, then how many of us are actually looking? Marcus had been in prison for 8 years when he became eligible for parole. His lawyer, a new one assigned by the state, encouraged him to express remorse at the hearing, to show that he'd changed, to give the parole board a reason to release him early. "You've been a model prisoner," the lawyer said, reviewing Marcus's file. "No incidents, no violence, you've taken classes, participated in therapy programs. If you show genuine remorse and a plan for rehabilitation, you have a decent chance." Marcus listened quietly, then asked, "What if I don't feel remorse?" The lawyer sighed. "Then you'll serve your full sentence. Parole boards want to see transformation, Marcus. They want to believe you won't reoffend." "I won't reoffend," Marcus said calmly. "There's no one left to take revenge on. My mother is dead. Daniel is already destroyed. The business is gone. There's nothing left to do." "That's not exactly the message that will get you released," the lawyer said dryly. At the parole hearing, Marcus sat before a panel of 5 people who would decide his fate. They'd reviewed his case file, read the psychological evaluations, studied the original crime. The chairwoman, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Owens, looked at him over her reading glasses and asked the question that would determine everything. "Mr. Harrington, do you understand why what you did was wrong?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. He could lie. He could give them the answer they wanted to hear. But 8 years in prison had given him one thing he'd never had before: complete honesty. No more masks, no more pretending. "I understand that society considers what I did wrong," Marcus said slowly. "I understand that I broke laws, hurt people, and destroyed things that others valued. I understand that from an objective standpoint, my actions were criminal and caused suffering." Patricia waited. "But do you believe it was wrong?" Marcus met her eyes. "I believe it was inevitable. I was created by 30 years of neglect and invisibility. The Marcus who committed those crimes was the only possible outcome of the life I lived.
Was it wrong?
That depends on whether you believe people are responsible for the circumstances that created them, or whether circumstances deserve some of the blame. The room went silent. One of the board members, a younger man named David, leaned forward. That sounds like you're blaming your family for your choices.
No, Marcus corrected.
I'm acknowledging that my choices and their choices were all part of the same system. They chose to ignore me. I chose to make myself impossible to ignore. Both choices had consequences. We're all responsible for what we put into the world. Patricia made a note. Have you forgiven your family for how they treated you? Marcus almost smiled. Forgiveness implies I'm holding on to anger.
I'm not.
I'm past anger. I'm past everything. I did what I set out to do. There's nothing left to forgive or not forgive. There's just nothing. Can someone be considered rehabilitated if they feel nothing at all? The parole board denied Marcus's release. In their official statement, they cited lack of genuine remorse and inability to demonstrate emotional rehabilitation. Marcus would serve his full 12-year sentence. When his lawyer delivered the news, Marcus simply nodded. I expected that, he said. What will you do with the 4 remaining years? The lawyer asked. Read, think, exist, Marcus replied. Same as I've been doing. And that's exactly what he did. Marcus became something of a ghost in the prison present, but barely noticed, helpful but disconnected, polite but cold. Other inmates learned to leave him alone. Guards found him unsettling despite his perfect behavior. He'd achieved in prison what he'd achieved in his childhood, invisibility through compliance. But Marcus had changed in one significant way. He started writing. Not a memoir, not an apology, not an explanation. He wrote stories, dark, complex stories about families that destroyed each other, about invisible people who finally made themselves seen, about revenge that satisfied no one. His cellmate Rico, who'd been released and replaced by a younger inmate named Tommy, asked about the writing one day. You gonna publish those? Marcus looked up from his notebook. No, they're not for anyone else. They're just thoughts that need somewhere to go. What are they about? Tommy asked, genuinely curious. About people who don't fit in the spaces they're given, Marcus said. About what happens when you try to make yourself smaller to accommodate everyone else, and then one day you decide to take up all the space instead. Tommy nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Prison was full of people who'd taken up too much space in the wrong ways. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Daniel was trying to build something resembling a life. He'd remarried a woman named Claire who worked as a social worker and understood trauma in ways his first wife never could. They had a modest home, and Daniel had worked his way up to a director position at his company. Not the empire his father built, but honest work. His relationship with Sophie had healed somewhat. She was 17 now, preparing for college, and they talked regularly. She'd forgiven him for the chaos of her childhood, understood that he'd been a victim too, in his own way. Do you think about Uncle Marcus? She asked during one of their dinners. Every day, Daniel admitted. Sometimes I dream that he's standing in my house, just watching me. Not threatening, just watching, making sure I remember him. Do you? Do you? Sophie asked. Remember him? Daniel laughed, but it was bitter. I'll never forget him. He made sure of that. That was the whole point. Is it worse to be forgotten or to be remembered only as a destroyer? Marcus was released on a cold Tuesday morning in October, exactly 12 years after his arrest. He walked out of prison with a small box of belongings, some books, his notebooks of stories, and $53 from his prison account. No one was waiting for him. He'd been offered a spot in a halfway house and a job through a prisoner reentry program. He took both without comment, signed the papers, and started his new life as quietly as he'd ended his old one. He worked in a warehouse, loading boxes. The job required no thought, no interaction, no visibility. Perfect. His coworkers knew he was an ex-con everyone at the company was, but they didn't know his story. He was just Marcus, the quiet guy who showed up on time and left as soon as his shift ended. One day, about 6 months after his release, Marcus was at a grocery store when he saw Daniel. They locked eyes across the produce section. For a moment, neither moved. Then Daniel started walking toward him, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase for the first time in years. They stood 3 feet apart in front of the apples. 2 brothers who destroyed each other, now just 2 middle-aged men in a grocery store.
You're out, Daniel said. It wasn't a question.
6 months now, Marcus replied. Silence. Then Daniel asked the question that had been burning in him for 12 years. Was it worth it? Really, truly was destroying everything worth those few years of being seen? Marcus looked at his brother, the stranger who shared his blood, his childhood, his trauma. And for the first time since this whole thing began, Marcus answered with complete honesty.
No, he said quietly.
It wasn't worth it. I thought it would fill the emptiness inside me. I thought making you feel what I felt would somehow balance the scales. But revenge doesn't fill anything. It just creates new empty spaces. Daniel's eyes filled with tears.
Then why?
If you knew it wouldn't fix anything, why did you do it? Because, Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, I didn't know any other way to make you see me. And being seen as a monster was better than never being seen at all. They stood there in the fluorescent lights of the grocery store, surrounded by other people's normal lives. And Daniel did something he never thought he'd do. He reached out and hugged his brother. Marcus stood stiff in his arms, not returning the embrace, but not pulling away either. I see you now, Daniel whispered.
I'm sorry I didn't see you then.
I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry we failed you. Marcus didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because the truth was, it was too late. The apology came 12 years and one destroyed family too late. The thing Marcus had wanted his entire life to be seen, to matter, to be loved, was being offered now, when it could no longer heal anything. When Daniel finally let go, Marcus picked up his shopping basket and walked toward the checkout. He didn't look back. Daniel stood alone among the apples, watching his brother disappear into the crowd, wondering if that would be the last time they ever spoke. Some wounds, once opened, never fully close. Some words once spoken can never be taken back. Some families, once broken, remain broken forever.